Thank you very much for asking us to speak, and I'll be talking about pharma engagement in antiretrovirals for prevention. And obviously this is a new field for pharma, as it is for everyone else. And this is really involved in several stages. It started with preclinical work about 20 years ago. Certainly Gilead was one of the companies, along with others, that collaborated with the National Institutes of Health and with the CDC and with others to develop some animal models which demonstrated promising results for antiretrovirals for prevention. And then this led into clinical trials, which were kind of divided into both topical studies and also into oral studies. And it took some period of time for these to get launched. And nonetheless, we had results really on the first topical study. Ken was actually the PI of that and was presented at the Bangkok AIDS Conference in 2004 looking at tenofovir gel. And then that development path really led to the results from the Caprisa study, demonstration of the first topical microbicide to show effectiveness or efficacy in the prevention of HIV infection. And then there was a separate and parallel development program around oral drugs focusing on either Gilead or Truvada. And that was initiated roughly around the early 2000s and then led to the results from the IPREC study. I will mention that the entire effort really from the beginning up to the point in time that clinical data was released has really been a collaborative effort that's been a confederation of interested parties. It hasn't really been driven by pharma as HIV drug development for treatment has been. It's really been a collaboration between academic investigators, government researchers, and industry. And in that way, I think is quite a unique model, a good example of public-private cooperation, and one that actually has led to a regulatory approval and the new strategy that we're talking about here today. So we've actually entered a new phase. We've done the preclinical work, we've done the clinical work to demonstrate efficacy, and now we have to deal with effectiveness, which is oftentimes much more challenging and certainly introduces the human element of human behavior, which is something that is obviously very important to understand and very challenging to manage. And then systems work. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about that, but we're just beginning the process of trying to put together the systems that actually might deliver this intervention to see if it really will be an effective means of reducing the rate of new infections for HIV. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Truvada. It's obviously something I'm most familiar with, and talk about how Gilead has been managing Truvada to date as the first example of an antiretroviral approved for this new indication. But then I'd like to talk about research efforts as well, not only the ones that Gilead is engaged with, but those that are engaged with my pharma colleagues. And I think the participation of pharma in this effort is actually quite broad. And we won't certainly go through all of the work that's ongoing, but I think we'll try to highlight some of the important activities. And then we talked already a little bit about the PrEP utilization data, and I might highlight a few additional things around that. That's an effort that Gilead will continue to update on a periodic basis over the next three years or more. So as has been mentioned earlier, Truvada was approved for the PrEP indication in 2012, and the labeled indication is that Truvada is indicated in combination with safer sex practices for pre-exposure prophylaxis to reduce the risk of sexually acquired HIV infection in adults at high risk. And as Tripp mentioned earlier, this was actually very carefully worded, and the way that's stated. It has very specific meaning. Additional data has been presented in the IDU population. The indication has not been updated to include that as part of the indication. However, the CDC has issued normative guidance around this that builds upon what's already in the approved label for Truvada. The indication is based on clinical trials in MSM at high risk for HIV infection and in heterosexual serodiscordant couples. The label also addresses factors to help identify individuals at high risk, and they include having a partner known to be HIV infected or engaging in sexual activity within a high prevalence area or social network, and one or more of the following. including inconsistent or no condom use, so that actually is part of the label, diagnosis of sexually transmitted infections, exchange of sex for commodities, use of illicit drugs, incarceration, and partners of unknown HIV-1 status with any of the factors listed above. So when prescribing Truvada for PrEP indication, healthcare providers are strongly encouraged to include it as part of a comprehensive prevention strategy, to counsel individuals to strictly adhere to a daily dosing schedule because of the relationship between adherence and outcome, to confirm, very importantly, confirm a negative HIV test immediately prior to initiating PrEP, and then while using Truvada for PrEP, to perform screening tests at least at intervals of every 3 months. In addition, Gilead has initiated a REMS program. REMS stands for Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy. It's a specific FDA program which is intended to manage a known or potential risk associated with the use of a drug. It can come in a variety of forms, including restricted drug distribution or education or other elements as well. The goals of the Truvada REMS are largely around education and not around specifically drug distribution, and stresses the importance of adherence, the importance of regular monitoring of HIV-1 serostatus, and that Truvada for PrEP must be part of a comprehensive prevention strategy. Many people are not aware of the Truvada PrEP REMS website. I don't know if you all are or whether any of you have visited this or not, but there actually is a wealth of information here, including practical information that could be used by you if you're attempting to implement a PrEP program at your institution or university. It includes safety information, training guides, but also an agreement form that lists the responsibilities of both the healthcare provider and also the individual who will be receiving PrEP, a checklist for prescribers, and of course the full prescribing information. So if you haven't visited the website, I encourage you to do so. It may actually provide some of the background information and help you craft your own protocol for delivering PrEP in your specific healthcare setting. In addition to what's required legally under the REMS, Gilead has engaged in a variety of other activities to assist the rollout of PrEP, and that includes free HIV and HPV testing for qualified individuals, and free condoms. Anyone here can order condoms. You actually just go onto the website. I've done it myself. We used to have a voucher program that you could print out and take to Walgreens. However, that was grossly underutilized, and so it's now in the process of probably being discontinued. However, you will be able to receive them online. They're delivered actually to whatever address you assign. And I think there's a minimum because we're only allowed, I think under law, to provide less than $10 worth of free materials. I think it's maybe 3 condoms, 2 condoms or 3 condoms that can be ordered on a periodic basis. Probably will not meet the need for somebody who's really sexually active and needs PrEP, but nonetheless it is a resource that would be available to you. We actually are encouraging people to use it because obviously working with our vendor, we'd like to see it used more broadly than it has been to date. And that goes actually for the HIV and HPV testing, which has not been used very broadly as well either. We also subsidize HIV viral resistance testing to individuals who seroconvert. There's also information on the website about that. And we have obviously support for community education activities on PrEP, support for demonstration projects, and we do have a medication assistance program, as was mentioned earlier, for PrEP that provides the drug for individuals who lack insurance coverage and meet the requisite criteria. So how will PrEP be made available in clinical practice? The drugs are the same as they are for HIV treatment. So it is Truvada, named Truvada, and it has the same packaging as Truvada for treatment. The guidance to its use in the U.S. is by the U.S. label. In other countries, if it's used, it could be by a variety of means. It could be through the regulatory process, if indeed there's interest in terms of making a regulatory application. Gilead is willing to do that. Or it could be through normative guidance, guidelines issued by the local country agencies that are responsible for doing that. And it may vary by country which route is pursued. The CDC has issued guidance for PrEP, as we know here in the U.S., dealing with MSM, serodiscordant couples, and IDUs. And guidelines have been drafted by other groups, including the WHO and various European HIV groups. The access to the medication remains to be determined at the local level, and obviously the system in the U.S. is quite complex, but so far actually access to medication has not been the major obstacle to uptake of PrEP. And internationally, the same systems that are used to provide the drug for treatment will likely be used, the same systems that would be used for accessing the drug for prevention. So through the PEPFAR, the Global Fund, or through local provision by governments that issue their own tenders. And it is available. Gilead does have an access program in the international arena. Tenofovir or Viriad are registered in over 100 countries globally. It includes all of Africa. We do have partnerships with distributors to make branded Truvada and Viriad available locally. And we also have partnership with over a dozen generic manufacturers in India and Africa to make generic versions of Tenofovir and FTC in combination with other products. So they're free to combine it as they will, name it as they will, price it as they will, and compete in the marketplace. And this system has actually effectively driven the price down over 70 or 80% over the past 5 years. So Viriad itself was $1.35 a day in around 2005 or 6, and now is about 14 cents a day. And Truvada is about 20 cents a day in the developing world. Through the work of our generic partners. And over 4 million patients in the developing world are now on a TDF-containing regimen for treatment, and more than 95% of these patients are receiving it through our generic partnerships. This program's worked very well, and we've actually transferred technology for our new HIV products as well. We've also donated our intellectual property to Unitaid and to the patent pool for their use as they see fit. So one of the important components, ways in which Pharma has been engaged in terms of making PrEP available is through support of ongoing research. So with respect to Truvada, there are ongoing phase 3 studies, including the IPERGAY study in North America, in France and in Canada. In Germany it will be as well, where they're looking at coitally dependent dosing of Truvada as opposed to daily dosing. There are also phase 3 study extensions and rollovers, includes the Partners PrEP trial, IPREX-Soleil, the TDF2 trial in Botswana, and the CDC Bangkok IDU study in Thailand. As we've discussed already, there are a variety of demonstration projects ongoing, including a CDC demonstration project that will be conducted at 4 centers in the US. That'll get underway sometime later this year. As you've heard already about the San Francisco, Miami, Washington, D.C. demonstration project that's NIAID funded, that Stephanie described, is currently ongoing and is the demonstration project the furthest along in the U.S. And then there's a study in London called the PROUD trial, which is looking at early versus delayed initiation of PrEP on top of best practices, and that is about halfway accrued in the pilot phase of the study. In addition, there are a variety of phase 1 and 2 studies looking at alternative dosing strategies and regimens in new populations, includes the intermittent dosing study being carried out by Bob Grant and others, and called the ADAPT trial, as well as alternative regimens. Ken and Tripp are the PIs for the HBTN 069 study, looking at Maraviroc plus or minus tenofovir FTC, and looking at alternative patient populations, including adolescents in high-risk minority populations, ages 16 to 22, in the ATN 110 and 113 studies. There's a lot of interest in the use of PrEP around conception, what's called nicknamed PrEPception. Actually, Meg Ryan here in Boston is planning on conducting a pilot study, which hopefully will get started sometime next year, looking at this. And this a lot of studies actually work ongoing, either preclinical or initial clinical work, looking at topical application of antiretrovirals. Vaginal, rectal formulations. There's actually some studies ongoing now in the MTN looking at rectal application of tenofovir gel. New formulations in patient populations, safety and efficacy trials, and in particular, dapivirine ring study now is in phase 3 in Africa, and I think that'll be very interesting to follow that microbicide trials network trial to see what the outcome from that will be. And then, of course, new drugs, including a new prodrug of tenofovir called TAF, tenofovir alafenamide, is being studied in a variety of new formulations, and also the possibility of developing prevention-specific ARVs. So there are a list of, here for Truvada, a variety of ongoing and planned phase 3-4 research, including demonstration projects, total of 25 studies, potentially including as many as 24,000 subjects. And this is a list of the research in MSM, and 17 studies over 14,000 subjects. Most of the larger trials were either the phase 3 studies or the extensions of the ongoing studies. One of the largest studies here is PROUD, which will be conducted only if the pilot is successful. So it's unclear what the total number here will be. Most of the demonstration projects have included a smaller number of subjects. And the good news is if you have a means of actually directly measuring adherence, and if you know that adherence is correlated to outcome, you actually can have the ability to conduct studies of smaller size and still get a pretty good idea in terms of whether the intervention is adopted by that patient population, and a good idea whether indeed it might have an impact in that particular patient population. So that's perhaps some of the good news going forward. And then this looks at the studies looking at heterosexual women and men. Again here, total of 8 trials looking at perhaps as many as 10,000 subjects. But again, if you look, most of the big numbers are from the studies that are extensions of the ongoing trials. If you actually look at the new studies that are ongoing, the numbers, particularly in the heterosexual patient population, particularly for women, are quite small. So this is really a marked demonstrated need here in the U.S. is to have more studies ongoing in this particular patient population. There are a variety of challenges to the implementation of PrEP in the U.S. we've been discussing already today. The initial uptake of PrEP has been slow, but it is increasing. There's limited provider experience. If you look at the number of patients in the original file that was submitted to the FDA, there were about 10,000 patients included in that file. However, less than 1,000 were here from the U.S., and there were really only 4 sites in the U.S. Out of the many sites that were involved in the package. So the experience was actually quite limited from the perspective of healthcare providers. And indeed, it is a new strategy with no clear template for administration, many practical questions regarding that, as we've been talking about today. And in many places don't actually have a PrEP protocol in place. Many centers will have a PEP protocol, but they don't yet have a PrEP protocol. And so I think that would be an important first step, is to actually put a protocol in place. So if there are healthcare providers that are interested in making it available, they would sort of have a protocol that they could look at that would tell them how to do that. And actually, the Fenway, I think, has one of the largest programs now in terms of PrEP implementation in the U.S. So you clearly have been leaders not only in research, but also now in terms of implementation. The separation of HIV prevention and treatment services is something we've talked about already, which is an important barrier. Reimbursement for drug services is becoming clear, but for drug, but for services is not yet that clear. A low level of awareness among subjects and providers, although that's improving. And then defining, as was mentioned earlier this morning, who are the eligible subjects and who should we really target for PrEP. So the good news is many of the above issues can be addressed with additional experience and data. So new drugs in development for HIV prevention. I'll talk about just a few selected studies. I won't go into great detail into HPTN 069. The 2 PIs are here. A Maraviroc study already almost well on its way to full enrollment. Obviously will be a very important trial, phase 2 study for safety, looking at Maraviroc, which could lead to then the initiation of a phase 3 study, and the appropriate design and resources are put in place for that. And then there's been a lot of discussion about long-acting preparations, and certainly the 2 that are furthest along are a long-acting rilpivirine and then a GSK integrase, and vaginal rings or gels. And my colleagues from ViiV and from Janssen were very kind to share information related to the long-acting studies that have been conducted. And again, GSK 744 is an HIV integrase strand transfer inhibitor. It's an analog of dolutegravir. And TMC 278LA is a long-acting form of rilpivirine. They have been put together. This data has been presented at the IAS meeting in Kuala Lumpur. Phase 1 study looking at a variety of different dosing intervals and some combinations. And the bottom line is it did show that concentrations of both the integrase inhibitors shown in this slide and also the NNRTI rilpivirine in this slide were well above the levels anticipated to be needed for HIV suppression with once monthly dosing. And the integrase could probably be dosed at a less frequent interval. They've shown some data in support of that. And we've already talked about the work that Gilead's doing on identifying prescription patterns in the U.S. I'll add one other thing to what's been mentioned before, that only 30% of the individuals who prescribed Truvada for PrEP also prescribed it for HIV treatment. So again, that reinforces the fact that it may indeed be a different patient population, a different prescriber base that's initiating this. I will also mention too that the method that's used for extracting this data, although I think it's one of the best methods out there, is not that robust at this point in time. It's essentially a subtraction method where you look at all prescriptions for Truvada and then you take out those individuals that might have a third drug that indicate they're on treatment or might have had a diagnosis of Hep B, so they're receiving off-label Truvada for Hep B. So out of over 100,000 perhaps periods of time where individuals are on Truvada, you come down with about 2,000 where they might have had it for PrEP. So as more data is collected, I think those results will be more robust. So they're of interest, but I would not overinterpret them at this point in time. And so in conclusion, Truvada, we now have it available for pre-exposure prophylaxis in the US. REMS program is in place. The demonstration projects will yield very valuable data going forward. This is really a new strategy, and it's similar to a product launch, but it really, I think, is going to take 5 to 10 years to realize the potential of the strategy, to see if you can identify the patients at high risk, whether they'll take the drug, and whether it will impact the incidence of new infections. So with that, I'll thank my colleagues who helped contribute to the presentation, and thank you for your attention. Yeah, so the question is why isn't Gilead actively promoting the indication? And you know, we firmly believe that it's a potentially very important public health strategy, and that's indicated, I think, by our support, both the preclinical and clinical research that's been ongoing. However, it is a very controversial area and one where we don't already have a demonstrated model of another intervention that's been used there. And I think Gilead wants to be supported, but we don't really want to get in the way. And I think if this was seen as something that we promote as we typically do for HIV treatments and another means for Gilead to make additional revenues from Truvada, it would really detract from the important discussion, which is really what is the public health benefit of this intervention. So I think we felt it would be most appropriate for us to work with third parties that have the expertise in the public health arena and can speak with that voice.